What's up, everybody? My name is Shannon, and I am still waiting for my Satyr, and today we are talking about the final book in the Grishaverse Trilogy, Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. The funny thing about getting to this point in the Grisha trilogy is that everybody who's either read them or knows about them and knows me has been like, why are you doing this to yourself? Because when I read the first book, I was really into it and it made me really excited to get into the second book until I read the ending. Then I was like, oh great, what have I done? And then with the second book, I think because I kind of went into it knowing and tempering my expectations, I did get some enjoyment out of it, but I was still okay, I really wish things were going in a different direction. It did have some pacing issues. So getting into Ruin and Rising, I was definitely looking forward to it the least because I knew the story wasn't going to go the way I was wanting it to. I knew no matter how much I would be taken in by the scenery, by, the world that we are in, it wasn't going to go the way I wanted. And I am glad that I went in knowing that. I did go in knowing not exactly spoilers for what happens, but kind of just that, my villain shipper heart was not going to be fulfilled. And I've come to learn, how Leigh Bardugo writes a little bit throughout these books. And that is one thing I will say on the positive. You can definitely see how she changes as a writer throughout these books. I think her plot structure gets a lot tighter. In the first book, I felt like the plot at the end kind of came out of nowhere, and then it felt a little bit more cohesive in the second book. And then with this one, I feel like it was the best written out of the bunch. However, once I got to that last third, that last little chunk of the book, I was skimming because I was over it and I was just ready to be done with it. So at this point in the Grisha trilogy, basically, once again, everything has gone to shit. Alina cannot access her power. She is deep underground. The Darkling has taken over, and we need to find the last amplifier. I actually really did like the beginning of this book and most of the middle of it as well. I really liked having Nikolai come back in and seeing what he was doing. He is by far the best part of these books because he just injects so much life into them, and that's what more than anything makes me excited to continue on, because I really like him and I really want to see what's going to happen with him because of where he ends up at the end of this book. I think, obviously we're really in for something special once you get into his trilogy. But I did like the beginning of this kind of, with Alina kind of figuring out what she wants, where she's going, how she's bringing things together. I felt like she felt more connected to things than she had in the previous books. And then the big chunk in the middle of this is dedicated to finding the third amplifier, which I liked a lot. We get to go to new places, we get to see new things. It felt very mythic and very cool. But then as we get into more stuff with the Darkling, we start to head towards more endgame stuff. That's where my frustrations just really start to come in. So I do want to talk about spoilers here just because, as I've sat with it and as I've learned more about it, it has kind of changed my opinion about things, especially when it comes to the Darkling. I have a friend online who's really kind of talked me through everything when it comes to Leigh Bardugo, and the big sense I get when I read her writing, especially coming off of Wonder Woman. I know I've talked about that a lot. If you want to hear my thoughts on it, I will link it above. But the sense that I get from her is that her stories feel a little bit cautionary. She baits the enemy ship very heavily. And what annoys me is that throughout the Grisha trilogy, she does it over and over and over. And every time she snatches it away, she's like, why on earth are you into this? You shouldn't be into this. And it just kind of takes me out of it. And it makes me feel bad as a reader for wanting this. You presented me with this really cool character and this really cool dynamic. And then in the text, you're kind of calling me out for liking it. And that happens so much with the Darkling, to the point where we get scenes where even his own mother is saying that he's irredeemable. Alina finds out that they could be related and she's completely disgusted by him by that point. They're not actually related, but it felt so retroactively anti-Reylo, which is hilarious because these books came out before, The Last Jedi and all that kind of discourse. And, you can ship whatever you'd like, but I just felt like the same arguments were being brought up, and it started to really kind of weigh on me. As I've kind of talked about this out a little bit more, and as we see with the end of the story, clearly Leigh Bardugo has this strong connection to the Darkling. Clearly she does really like this character or is really intrigued by him because of how she writes him, because of the backstory he gets and how much time he gets. I do already know this, and I'm gonna go ahead and say this anyway. Like I said, we are talking spoilers, but he dies at the end of this book, but he's not actually dead because he comes back later in Nikolai's series. I was spoiled on that before I even ever knew anything about the continuity of any of these books. So what that tells me is, like, if she truly hated this character and, like, truly didn't want you to have any kind of sympathy or like him at all, I don't really see why she would bring him back, because he is such an interesting foil, especially for Nikolai's character as well. I was really hoping that these books would focus more heavily on him, Nikolai, and Alina, because they make a more interesting trinity than him, Mal, and Alina, because Mal, he does get a lot of time, and, like, his story does end up kind of making sense by the end of this, but I still wish he had just been left in the first book. The last thing I kind of want to talk about is Alina's story as a whole. Largely, I just feel like she was a very passive main character. I felt that a lot with the first book in the series. That's part of the reason why the ending was so frustrating for me. As the books have gone on, I think it's gotten better. Like, part of the reason I say, like, the plot feels tighter is because Alina feels a lot more connected to it. Like, everything just seems to flow a little bit more nicely. But I feel like she would say things about her power and say things about what she wanted, but then she would do, like, a complete 180, and it just doesn't really sit that well for me. Part of the thing that I really hated was that in the second book, Mal talks about how, like, he wants that girl back, you know, when they were orphans and, like, they were just running around together and nobody noticed her. But, like, at the same time, like, that girl was hurting because she wasn't using her power, because she wasn't accepting who she was. And so to me, that tells me that Mal doesn't accept her and that he's not the right choice for her. Not to say that the Darkling is, because I don't think he fully accepts all of her either, but that is definitely something to think about. But then at the end of this book, she is basically rewarded with a life with Mal and being free of her power, which narratively, it kind of made sense, but for Alina's character, I just wish she could have embraced who she was. I think she could have, you know, put the saint title to rest, like, you know, faked her death and everything that she does at the end of this book, while still having her power, because that was what mattered. She found a new family with the Grisha, like, she became one of them. She was starting to accept herself, but then it was taken away again, and she ends the story exactly where she started, and that just doesn't work for me. So as a whole, it's funny because I hated the series, but I also really liked it. I do think that the story and, like, the choices that the main character makes are just ones that I'm not particularly a fan of. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but I do feel like it needs some work. But as I've seen, Leigh Bardugo does get a little bit better as she writes more. Do I trust her? No, I still don't. She hasn't given me any reason to trust her. But I am going to continue on and read the Six of Crows duology and most likely King of Scars as well. I did really like Ninth House when I read it. I'm not sure if I can trust her on that, but I am looking forward to reading more of that. It's kind of like my relationship with Cassandra Clare. Like, I don't trust her. I don't think everything that she does is a banger, but I do really like this world that she's created, and I do want to see what else she does with it. So I really don't recommend reading this series. I have been told from my last video that you really don't have to read it to read her other books. It just can make some things, like especially the politics, kind of make a little bit more sense, but it sounds like if you wanted to skip out on this, it would be okay. Largely what I've seen as well is that if you do skip out on it, don't go back to it, because it's just going to make it even more frustrating. But, like, overall, I think I would give this series, like, a solid C-. Like, I'm giving this book, like, a pretty solid C-. I skimmed, like, the entirety of the last 100 pages because I was just over it. I knew where it was going, and it just started to really, like, grate on my nerves. So this series definitely wasn't for me, but I am very excited about the world. I am very excited to see what's going to happen with Six of Crows. I have already started it. I am already very interested in where it's going. So I guess you guys will just have to stay tuned for that. But that was the Grishaverse Trilogy. Let's see what happens next. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit that like button down below, and don't forget to subscribe so you can talk books with me every week. That is everything I got for today, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!